Hello and thank you for joining us. Lawmakers on both sides of the aisle are demanding answers as to how a journalist was inadvertently added to a group chat with Trump administration officials discussing war plans. Some of the top intel officials involved were grilled by lawmakers Tuesday during a hearing that was supposed to be focused on ongoing threats. CIA Director John Ratcliffe and Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard both denied sharing any classified material about U.S. plans for attacks against Houthi rebels in Yemen. The group used Signal for the chat, a publicly available encrypted messaging app. Gabbard also declined to share the full contents of the conversation and refused to confirm whether she was using her personal phone. Here was Ranking Member on the Senate Intelligence Committee, Mark Warner.
If this was the case of a military officer or an intelligence officer and they had this kind of behavior, they would be fired.
Nevertheless, President Trump and members of his administration are remaining defiant.
My communications, to be clear, in a Signal message group were entirely permissible and lawful and did not include classified information.
On Tuesday afternoon, the president defended the administration and National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, who added the journalist to the chat.
I don't think he should apologize. I think he's doing his best. It's equipment and technology that's not perfect, and probably he won't be using it again.
CBS News has learned this incident is not the first time Signal has been seen in a negative light. Internal documents from the National Security Agency show a special bulletin was sent to staff warning them of the app's vulnerabilities last month. We begin tonight with White House reporter Olivia Rinaldi and senior national security correspondent Charlie D'Agata. Olivia, the administration trying to downplay this, focusing on what it calls the success of the strikes. Walk us through what more we're hearing from the president and officials who were in that group chat.
Yeah, Lindsay, it's good to be with you tonight. This is the first time we're hearing from President Trump specifically on this matter, this Signal group chat debacle. He held a meeting today with ambassadors, and ahead of that meeting, we heard him talk about this at length. He said that in Goldberg's addition to the chat, that's the editor who was added to the messaging app where he saw all of this conversation about war plans play out. He said that it had no impact at all on that March 15th military operation in Yemen that sought to target Houthi rebels. Trump also said he really cast doubt on some of the reporting that Goldberg had. This is someone who Trump has a very long history with. Trump also repeated what we had heard from Secretary Hegseth, which is that there was no classified information shared in that group chat. Now, that's something that Jeffrey Goldberg himself has said is just not true. He witnessed it, he saw it, and he has speculated that he might share some of that information. Nonetheless, though, we are hearing from the president for the first time, still taking a very public stance behind Mike Waltz, his national security advisor. There were conversations about whether or not Waltz is at fault here, since he was the one who added Goldberg into the chat. Trump earlier today said that Waltz does not need to apologize for using the Signal app, adding that he thinks Waltz is doing his best and saying that the technology is faulty. You heard him there talk about that. But of course, this messaging app Signal is something that is used very consistently among top brass of the Trump administration. They used it to communicate with each other, to communicate with members of the media, clearly. And so this is something that is still ongoing and still being reviewed. We also heard from Caroline Leavitt, who's the White House press secretary this morning, who again reiterated what the White House is trying to say, which is that no war plans were discussed, no classified materials were sent on the thread. She also added that the White House counsel's office has provided guidance on the platforms administration officials can use to communicate safely, Signal being one of them. So interesting to see how this will continue to unfold, particularly the use of Signal in this administration.
I want to circle back in a second to the idea that this is faulty. But Charlie, both President Trump and Secretary Hegseth deny anything classified was discussed in this chat. But if, in fact, war plans were shared, as Goldberg says they were, how would information like that typically be shared and to whom?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, there are systems in place for that, right? There are not only apps, but there's hardware that's used in sharing that sort of information. It also comes, it's called a SCIF, right? if I were to walk down the hall right now, right, and past the tank, that's where the Joint Chiefs of Staff meets. The Defense Secretary's office, almost any of the branches of the military, you see signs everywhere. And there are physical boxes where you have to put your phone inside, right? You leave them outside. No phones inside, certainly no phones coming out, no recording devices. And sometimes it's referred to, the classification level is high side or a high security environment. Then there's low side, which is usually where we in the media operate. So the sharing of information at some level, it's going to be shared. It's sometimes called controlled classified. And as I said, there are SCIFs. I guess the most notable or famous one is in the Situation Room that we all know about, right? In the White House, and it stands for Secured Compartmented Information Facilities. And I know that sounds technical, but it becomes critical mass because it's not only of the nature of the information that was shared in that group chat, but where it came from. And we kind of learned more of that today in those hearings because it seemed to indicate that classified information, if we can call it that, because that in itself is sensitive, that sensitive information may have come from the Defense Secretary itself. That is why it's critical mass. That's why it's important. These systems are in place. They have what might be called an app, as President Trump said, or systems where they not only have communication devices, but communication systems that are in place. And Signal is not one of them.
Charlie, Vice President Vance took a shot at our European allies in that group chat. Can you explain why he felt the strikes against the Houthis would help Europe more than the U.S. and what impact this could have on our relationships? Yeah,
Lindsay, first of all, J.D. Vance has made no secret of his disdain for America's European allies. And according to that report, Vance said in the chat he thought the strikes were a mistake. He actually said that, allegedly said it. Only 3% of U.S. trade moves through the Suez Canal, while 40% of European trade moves through it. It also raised, in his words, kind of mixed messaging from President Trump's stance on Europe when, at a time when they may be reducing involvement in NATO, may possibly hand over NATO's Supreme Commander of Europe to a European this summer for the first time in 75, 80 years. And actually in the chat, he gave in. He said, I just hate bailing out Europe. And for good measure, this is important, too. Secretary Hegseth said, look, I feel your loathing for European freeloading. It's pathetic. Again, quoting the chat. But remember, this comes just a couple of weeks after Vance dismissed the notion of a European peacekeeping force in Ukraine, which the the UK and France had committed to, saying it was, and this is harsh, it was unlikely to come from some random country that hasn't fought a war in 30 to 40 years. Now, having lived in the UK myself for around 30 years, I follow the media there, and that sparked outrage more than anything I can remember coming out of the United States in recent times, because British commentators say, look, British forces have fought beside Americans, died on the battlefields of Iraq and Afghanistan. So this latest salvo, if you want to call it that, it wouldn't come as a surprise, but just more reinforcement of what this Trump administration, or at least J.D. Vance, thinks of Europe. More damage done.
Very interesting point, Charlie. Thank you. Olivia, I got to be quick with you, but the president said both. They likely won't be using Signal again, and they may be forced to, saying we may need speed as opposed to gross safety. So what is being done to prevent future lapses like this?
Well, we know that the White House is saying they're reviewing the use of Signal among top administration officials. As I mentioned, this is something a lot of them use. A lot of them communicate with each other in this fashion. But as you heard Charlie lay out there, it's really not a secure messaging platform for them to be talking about such sensitive information. I suspect that a lot of these folks will be reviewing whether or not they should be using this platform, whether or not it's actually safe on a broader scale. It is encrypted, but what does that actually mean? iMessage is encrypted in some form or fashion as well. So I suspect that this will be part of an ongoing investigation internally, something that they'll likely want to keep under wraps. We know that this is an administration that doesn't like to admit mistakes. This is certainly not one that they're willing to come forth and say that something was done wrong with. So interesting to watch there to see whether or not this pattern of not admitting a mistake and continuing to use Signal will continue.
Okay, Olivia Rinaldi and Charlie D'Agata, thank you both so much. For more, let's bring in CBS News Homeland Security correspondent Nicole Sganga. Nicole, Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard refused to even admit her involvement during the ongoing threats hearing today. Let's listen to part of that.
Director Gabbard, did you participate in the group chat with Secretary of Defense and other Trump senior officials discussing the Yemen war plans?
Senator, I don't want to get into the specifics.
Ma'am, were you on? You're not going to be willing to address. So you're not. Are you denying? Matt, will you answer my question, ma'am? You were not TG on this group chat.
I'm not going to get into the specifics.
So you
of
refuse
the
to acknowledge whether you were on this group chat.
Senator, I'm not going to get into the specifics.
Why are you going to get into the specifics?
What else did we hear from her and other intel chiefs during the hearing?
Yeah, when it came to Signal, Lindsay, we heard a lot of deferring to the Department of Defense, deferring to the National Security Council, and straight up trying to avoid answering the questions. It was interesting to see, and Olivia alluded to this, the answers, the responses change among the spy chiefs as the hearing progressed. So initially, from Director Gabbard and others, there was no classified information that was shared on that Signal thread. Then, as the hearing evolved, we heard both Gabbard and Radcliffe say that, there were caveats, no classified information under the U.S. intelligence agency's purview that were shared. So we did hear a little bit of tweaking of language as this hearing progressed. There was a very notable exchange between the senator from Georgia, John Ossoff, who asked Radcliffe, whether or not officials revealed, quote, the time period during which enemy air defenses could target U.S. aircrews flying in enemy airspace, to which Radcliffe said, I don't know, to which Ossoff said, but you do. Didn't get an answer there. There was also a very interesting exchange from the senator from Colorado, Michael Bennet, who asked the spy chiefs if any of them realized that Trump's envoy in the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, who was in the Signal chat, had been traveling in Russia at the time of this conversation. He ended that exchange by saying, you need to do better.
What do we know about the National Security Agency warning of vulnerabilities in the Signal app?
Yeah, the NSA putting out a release last month warning of vulnerabilities within the Signal app that actually came on the tails of another revelation by the Ukrainian Defense Forces. It's the equivalent of what we call CISA here in the United States, and they put out a memorandum indicating that there were targeted attacks prompting compromised Signal accounts to send malware to employees of defense industry firms and members of Ukraine's armed forces. All of this on top of the fact that we heard from Google's threat intelligence group just last month of increasing efforts from several Russia state-aligned threat actors to compromise the Signal messenger accounts used by individuals of interest to Russia's intelligence services. And it really highlights the point here, which is we're not just speaking of a hypothetical threat, of a what if when it comes to the Signal app. There have been some demonstrated interest by bad actors in Russia to infiltrate Signal Messenger, the Signal Messenger app in Ukraine, and now concerns that that could be the case here in the United States as well, Lindsay.
All right, Nicole Sganga, thank you.
Thank you.